What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If. If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my third channel, so if you want some more what ifs, go check out my other channels. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. Team 7 was silent as they neared the village gates after the bridge had been completed. The entire village had come out to see them off after a tearful goodbye between Naruto and Inari. They'd been on their way. They walked forward with their heads held high, knowing the nation had a chance for a brighter future now thanks to them. For the most part, Naruto had mostly returned to his usual self over the few weeks it had taken them to finish the bridge. A bit quieter, there were still times when dreams of the masked boy interrupted his sleep, but with time and the support of his sensei and occasionally Sakura, he had taken great strides to move on. He'd run through the events on the bridge many a time in his head, wondering if things could have gone differently. His sensei's words and Sakura's reassurances had helped, but he still couldn't help but wonder how things would have turned out if he hadn't walked into that dome of ice mirrors, if maybe he'd tried to take the masked boy out of the fight with that first unseen blow. But then how would he have reacted if he'd lived? Zabuza wouldn't have stopped unless Gato decided to show himself before they killed him. They would have been forced into a battle to the death. When he thought about how he felt when he'd believed that Sasuke died, he had to wonder how would the masked boy have reacted if they'd killed Zabuza while he was still alive. He liked to think things would have worked out, but there were a lot of ways things could have gone wrong. There was something else Kakashi had told him since that day, cliche as it sounds. There's no point dwelling on what ifs, and that was true. Thinking about all the ways it could have gone differently wouldn't change that the masked boy was dead, buried back there in wave. Kakashi had sealed Zabuza's body into a scroll. Apparently that was the normal thing to do with rogue ninja. They tended to have pretty big bounties on their heads, which made sense between betraying their village and whatever crimes they committed to make a living afterward. Though Kakashi had mentioned that any shinobi who made a name for themselves would probably wind up with a bounty too. That was kinda cool. It was like a measure of your awesomeness. Not really worth it though when it came with people looking to cash in. Sakura meanwhile had been quiet, and she wouldn't talk about why. She kept to herself, throwing glances to him and Sasuke every once in a while, and seemed unsure of herself. It sucked seeing the usually confident girl like that, but she just wouldn't open up, not to him or Kakashi. She'd say something supportive to her fellow genin every once in a while, but that was that. She hadn't even fawned over Sasuke since that day on the bridge. He'd had to check to see if the sky was falling when he realized that. And Sasuke, well, Sasuke had been himself, the textbook example of brooding. The three genin couldn't help but feel somewhat relieved. Home was in sight, but Naruto noticed Kakashi didn't seem as relaxed. While he mostly seemed his usual cool self, he hadn't once taken out that stupid book of his, and he noticed the man's eye was slightly tense as they approached the gates. The guard looked up and greeted them. Hey, welcome back. He frowned, his face twisting slightly as he took in the genin. Tough mission. It wasn't a failure, was it? Oh no, nothing like that, Kakashi replied before rubbing the back of his head and looking away. It's a long story. Let's just say Lord Hokage's going to rake me over the coals and leave it at that. That got Naruto's attention. Why would the old man be mad? They managed, hadn't they? Not exactly the way he'd have wanted, but they pulled it off. He'd have to be impressed that they saved a nation, right? Ouch. The guard gave him a look of sympathy. Well, best not put it off. And with that they all entered the village and made their way down the road to the administration building. They walked up the familiar corridors and soon found themselves at the Hokage's office. They knocked on the door to the office and got the okay to enter. Welcome back, Team 7. Hiruzen greeted from his desk with a nod as the four walked in, a hand on his pipe. He frowned slightly when he took in the three genin. Naruto didn't have his usual smile. He couldn't grin as he usually could, knowing what they'd be discussing, and his eyes were open. Beside him he noticed Sakura was looking as sullen as she always had for the past few weeks. I take it there were complications, that's one way to put it. Kakashi began with a sigh. He then looked to the Hokage, slightly tense as if he was expecting a blow. There were some things the client kept from us and some unexpected developments. Had we known everything, the mission would have been classified as A rank in difficulty. Was this revealed to you early on or once you reached the land of waves? Hiruzen frowned deeply. Early on. Hiruzen's eyes hardened as he stared at Kakashi. And am I to understand that you continued the mission anyway? That's correct, Lord Hokage. He set his pipe down and leaned forward, clasping his hands before him. I'm going to need a full explanation, and so Team 7 gave him a full report on everything that happened. The third Hokage was silent for most of the explanation, occasionally asking for clarification on some details, but otherwise simply listened. When it was over he clasped his hands before him and closed his eyes as he contemplated all that he had just heard. Finally he looked up. I'm going to ask that you all remain silent. Until I'm finished speaking, the third god of shinobi began. He looked to the genin with approval. First, let me commend the three of you for the success of this mission despite facing danger far beyond what you had any right to be prepared for. At this point in your career you pushed on for the sake of the client and his people. In doing so you saved an impoverished nation from a dark fate and granted them new hope. Not only that, but you rekindled the wills of its downtrodden people. For this you should be proud, as I am to call you shinobi of this village. Naruto smiled widely at those words, just as the blonde always had. Sasuke has a small smirk, which was about the most one could get from him. Sakura's expression on the other hand hadn't changed. Then the Hokage's face hardened once again as his gaze turned towards their sensei. However, Kakashi met his eyes unflinchingly. It should never have come down to you in the first place. The genin were clearly surprised, but Hiruzen kept going. Kakashi, it is your job as their Jonin leader to not only protect and guide them but to recognize when they're in over their heads and pull them back. You should have returned to the village the moment it became clear that this mission was beyond your students' current capabilities, regardless of their feelings on the matter, at least when they're still this early in their careers. If you had already reached wave by the time you became aware of the true scope of the mission, if it was too late to turn back without condemning their nation, that would be one thing. While Tazuna's reasoning is understandable given the circumstances, I would not have been against working out a long-term payment plan or agreeing to later reimbursement, and then we could have sent a proper escort with him. Naruto and Sakura's jaws dropped while Sasuke frowned. They hadn't even thought of that. Then again, his teammates had probably been as happy to take a mission that wasn't painting fences or tending lawns as he was, and who knows how things would have turned out if anyone else had gone. Kakashi was a pretty big deal among Jonin, wasn't he? What if whoever they sent instead wasn't a match for Zabuza? No, besides what happened with the ice user, Naruto couldn't say he had any regrets about taking the mission. Still, he could see the Hokage's point. The third Hokage's eyes narrowed. Need I point out that had this ice wielder been more like his master, or if Zabuza had more Chunin level ninja at his disposal, then this would have ended in disaster. Kakashi closed his. I know I trusted my students, but I understood the danger after my first battle with Zabuza. Hiruzen closed his eyes and sat for a moment in silent thought. When he opened them once more he stared at Kakashi. I won't punish you beyond this reprimand, but understand that you are on thin ice. The facts that first and foremost your genin have returned unharmed. The mission was a success, and that prior to your encounter with Zabuza, after reaching the land of waves, the mission appeared to be B rank, are somewhat mitigating factors. Nevertheless, I don't want to see this again until your students are ready for it. Understood, Kakashi answered with a nod. The Hokage sighed and sat back in his chair, picking up his pipe and taking a deep breath before blowing out a cloud of smoke. He then looked to the blonde. Naruto, you have been made aware of the origins of those chains? Yeah, Kakashi-sensei told me. Then the blonde frowned and raised a fist. Hey, why did no one tell me I came from a clan before? Well, I'm glad to see you're still high-spirited, the third noted before closing his eyes. The Uzamaki clan is a sore subject for Konoha. You see, the Uzamaki clan were actually distant relatives of one of the founding clans of this village, the Senju clan, that got exclamations of shock from Naruto and Sakura, while even Sasuke seemed surprised to hear that. The blonde stepped closer, eager to hear more. The Uzumaki were a powerful clan, one that retained strong relations with their cousins the Senju. They ultimately formed their own village. Uzushiogakure are staunchest allies. They were known for their mastery of the art of sealing jutsu and also for the longevity that those of the village, especially the Uzumaki, possessed. Indeed, they were the greatest masters of sealing jutsu in all the continent, and that made their village strong despite its small size. Naruto excitedly ate up all the information given to him. His hands were clenched into fists before him in eagerness as he listened to how amazing his family was and his clan was related to the Senju. He might not have paid a lot of attention in class, not to mention how often he was put out of the room for whatever reason they could think of before Iruka came and warmed up to him. But even he knew they were known as the strongest clan there was, and it meant he was related to the first and second Hokages distantly, but still awesome. But it was here that the story took a dark turn, and the Hokage solemnly closed his eyes. But their power made them a potential threat to many more, so thanks to their close alliance with us during a previous war while we were preoccupied facing our own enemies, Kumo and Iwa launched a surprise attack on Uzushio. His gaze turned to the ceiling, appearing lost in memories. Attacking seal masters on their own ground are usually folly. Uzushio's forces gave better than they got, but in the end there were just too many. The village was destroyed, and the few survivors of its leading clan scattered to the winds. You'll find them every once in a while here and there. He looked back to the genin, taking in the dejected look on Naruto's face. The fact that we failed to protect such treasured friends, the blood of one of our founding clans, is held as a dark mark on the history of our village, and Naruto quickly deflated upon hearing the fate of his clan. Sakura looked at him in sympathy while Sasuke gazed and thought of what he'd learned. After a few moments of silence he asked, so there are still other Uzumaki out there, and how did my mom come to our village if she was from Uzushio? The third Hokage shook his head. I'm sorry Naruto, it's unlikely you will encounter any others of your clan. We have not heard of any other Uzumaki in a long time. One of my students told me of one he found during the Second Shinobi World War, but he chose to remain where Jiraiya found him, and we have since had word of his death. As for your mother, she was transferred to our village as part of an agreement shortly before Uzushio's destruction. After a pause to let that reality sink in, Hiruzen picked up his account of the fallen clan. While we may not speak of the village or the clan for the shame associated with our failure, there are still signs of the solidarity we once had with them. The red spiral I'm sure you've noticed on the back of our flak jackets, and even some of our other attire like your own jacket, is the symbol of the clan. And Uzushio, Naruto's eyes widened. The symbol of his family had been staring at him in the face for all these years. The Uzumaki did not give their village their symbol out of vanity, mind you. It was because it rested on a small island off the western coast of the Land of Fire, the Land of Whirlpools, which fell along with the village. As the name suggests, the nation was surrounded by whirlpools, an effective natural defense, though not effective enough to save them. What better symbol to represent such a location than a spiral? There was silence as Naruto thought about all that he'd heard. Gramps, you and Kakashi-sensei have told me a lot about my mom and her clan, but what about my dad? And there was the question Hiruzen had known was coming, one that he had long debated on giving him an answer for, not if mind you, but when Naruto would need to know sooner or later about his legacy and about what the Hokage suspected lied in his future. His father had left him with great burdens that no one as young as Naruto should have to bear, but that was how the shinobi world worked. It was far better now than it was before the villages were formed, a dark time he was glad to have only heard about, but even now all too often young shinobi were forced to carry a weight a child never should. But whether he knew about them or not, they were his burdens to carry, and knowing where he came from, of his parents' legacy and feelings, may spur Naruto on to reach his full potential. He had never told Naruto before because it wasn't information he could allow getting out. There was always the risk of spies, and his father had many enemies. He couldn't risk him blurting the secret out, as children were wont to do, especially with as grand a secret as this. But he was a shinobi now, truly, if still early in his career. If he couldn't keep his own secrets, Hiruzen closed his eyes and contemplated for a few moments before looking at them once more. Let's move on for now already. Expecting the blonde to speak up, the third cut him off before he had the chance. Naruto, stay afterward, it's past time. I told you what you wanted to know. He then spoke to Sasuke and Sakura. This will be a private discussion, so I want you two to go home once we've concluded our business. But Sakura started to say, only to stop when Kakashi put his hand on her shoulder and shook his head. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. No doubt the Uchiha had already deduced why he wanted them out of the room. He regarded the blonde curiously for a moment before he shrugged and looked away. Hiruzen had no visible reaction as the Uchiha's wandering eyes landed on the pictures of the four Hokage hanging from his wall. A rare expression of pure shock lit up the Uchiha's face. Hiruzen watched him choke on his breath slightly as his gaze shot back to the back of Naruto's head. The boy quickly schooled himself. However, honestly, he was surprised that so many people who gave the boy a hard time didn't suspect, given Naruto's looks. Perhaps it was people's prejudice due to the Kyuubi, but he couldn't help but mentally sigh whenever a ninja who'd known his father failed to make the connection. There weren't that many people in the village with peach skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes, and he just happened to seal the Kyuubi into a babe that shared those traits with him, that wasn't even looking underneath the underneath. And of those who did realize and did nothing, well, the less said the better. At least his successor's last remaining student had his reasons now. If I'm not mistaken, you recovered Zabuza's body? Hiruzen questioned, receiving a nod from Kakashi in turn, who walked to the table and placed two scrolls before the Hokage. The one on the left is Zabuza's weapon, the Kubikura Bocho. Hiruzen nodded. That had potential. The blades of the seven swordsmen of the mist were extremely valuable. Perhaps they could use it at some point to help broker an alliance with Kiri. They would certainly appreciate it once we've processed the body and turned it in. You will of course receive your compensation. Unfortunately, for the danger they faced, they would only receive the reward of a C-rank mission, as that was what it had been categorized as soon as they had been paid and their business was concluded. Hiruzen dismissed the rest of Team 7 and Naruto stood before him. With a gesture he ordered the hidden Umbu that kept watch over the office at all times to leave them for a moment. Not that Naruto noticed leaving them truly alone. The boy was nervous, as anxious as he no doubt was to finally find out who his father was. He was sure he could tell that what they were about to discuss was a heavy subject. The Hokage stood and turned away. He clasped his hands behind his back as he gazed out of the window at the village and remembered that terrible night 13 years ago when their village lost so much, when Naruto lost his parents. The things I'm about to tell you are All secrets of the highest order, they are not to be repeated under any circumstances, not even to Kakashi, though he is aware of some of what I have to say. If word of this spread, you may find yourself a target of foes you cannot hope to stand against. Am I clear?" He turned back to Naruto, who seemed to recognize how serious this was. The blonde nodded, which he returned very well. He walked around his desk, coming to a stop in front of the blonde, and kneeled down so that he was at eye level with the genin. "Naruto, your father's name was Minato Namake's." Naruto's mind went blank. He stood frozen as he stared at his leader, his eyes wide and his mouth agape. All sound seemed to have vanished as the words of the Hokage echoed in his head. "Your father's name was Minato Namake's, the fourth Hokage, the hero." He'd always looked up to the man who'd sealed the QB inside of him. The old man made a gesture his head and looked to the far wall. Naruto followed his gaze, and it landed on a picture he'd seen before. One that he'd looked at many of the times he'd been brought to this office for something he'd done, and more recently on official business as a ninja. To a picture of a man with a kind smile, with focused, intelligent blue eyes that looked so different than his. But then Kakashi told him he'd gotten them from his mother, right? And while they may be shaped differently, they were the same shade of blue, with spiky blonde hair and peach-colored skin, so much like what he'd see looking into the mirror every day. The very idea had just seemed so impossible that it never clicked before he choked from the emotion welling up inside of him. His body started to tremble, his hands clenched into fists as his eyes clenched shut. "I know," the old man spoke softly, "I can't imagine how you must be feeling, but I know it must be overwhelming. I've wanted to tell you since the first time you asked me, but can you look me in the eye and tell me that you wouldn't have shouted this from the rooftops if I'd told you?" Back then Naruto was having trouble breathing, but those words got through to him. He wouldn't be able to say that your father had many enemies that may have sought vengeance upon his son had they learned you existed. "That is why I couldn't tell you, but you are a shinobi now. Keeping secrets is a part of this life." "Why?" Naruto's breath hitched as he spoke. "Why would he? Did he know what I was going to go through?" "I'm sure he did," Hiruzen said, closing his eyes. "Then how could he do this?" Naruto roared in rage, sorrow and pain, so many emotions flying through him for many reasons. One was simply this: Hiruzen looked him in the eye, because as Hokage he couldn't ask another to carry a burden, to make a sacrifice that he was not willing to be. Hokage means to protect all in this village, to serve as a pillar of support for everyone and mark the road for its people to follow. And also knowing the man, I believe it was because he felt there was no one he could trust more to use that power for the best in you rather than succumbing to it or resentment than his own son, because he believed in you. Tears began to flow from Naruto's eyes. He buried his face in his sleeve and wiped them away. So many conflicting thoughts filled his mind. He didn't know what to think of the fourth, his father. Part of him wanted to blame him for all that he had been through. Another part understood what the old man was saying, and another felt his heart swell at the idea that his father had faith in him. If he could meet the man now, he'd probably punch him in the gut, then hug him and not let go. He heard the Hokage rise to his feet and looked up to see him a few feet away with his back to him. "There is more," Hiruzen said, and Naruto could only do his best to ready himself after that revelation, even as his eyes still shimmered. "First, there are things you need to know, things that are common knowledge in most villages, but were kept from the recent generation here in Konoha in the hope that you would not be treated differently by your peers. The QB was not the only one of its kind." The blonde couldn't help but take in a soft gasp at that. "It is the strongest of 9 beasts, entities of pure chakra made flesh, known as the Biju. The Biju are immortal. Should they be killed, their chakra will merely disperse and eventually reform. For that reason, and in some cases to harness their power, the 9 are sealed into humans that exhibit immense reserves of chakra, and often some of the beast's powers as a result. People like you are known as Jinchuriki." "Jinchuriki?" Naruto echoed the term. Hiruzen turned to him with a nod. "Jinchuriki are by some regarded as their village's secret and greatest weapons. It is a lifelong status for you. See, if the Biju is removed from its container, the Jinchuriki will die. It is important you know that for you. See, your mother was the QB's previous Jinchuriki." "What? But then she must have known what he would go through." But wait, that didn't make sense with what he'd been told about her before. But Naruto struggled, so much going on in his head at the moment. "Kakashi told me she held the QB down for my dad to seal it, so how could she have?" The third Hokage nodded. "The vitality of the Uzumaki is an amazing thing, strong enough even to allow a Jinchuriki to survive being separated from their Biju, but while they may initially survive, the damage is mortal. Your mother lived past the beast's removal, but she was not long for this world." He then looked to the blonde in sympathy, walking forward and placing a hand on his shoulder. "I understand that this is a lot to take, and your father placed a heavy burden on your shoulders, but know this, I can tell you from having known them as well as I did. Your father loved your mother with all his heart. He did not care about the beast sealed within her, and it would not have affected how he would have looked at you." He allowed a moment of silence at a sniffle from Naruto. "And as for your mother, she would not have allowed your Father, to seal the QB within you without good reason, though I can only speculate as to what that reason is, but that is a discussion for another time. How did the QB escape? Hiruzen breathed deeply. When a female Jinchuriki becomes pregnant, part of the chakra that would normally maintain the seal instead nurtures the child, and during birth it's at its absolute weakest. That said, the seal can fairly easily be maintained by a master of the sealing arts. Minato had been trained by Kushina herself. He rivaled the Uzumaki's vaunted skill in the field, so it should have been well within his abilities to keep the QB from breaking free. As for how it happened, as I said, I can only speculate. There was silence as Naruto thought of all he'd learned before he asked a single question. What were they like, both of them? How did they meet, and what can you tell me about my clan? Hiruzen smiled, clearly happy to tell him, wearing the same brooding, or cool as his Sakura and his former classmates would put it, expression he usually wore. Sasuke made his way up the stairs to his home, well, where he lived anyway. It didn't feel like home. He hadn't felt at home since that night all those years ago where he lost everything. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, taking his shoes off in the entranceway, and began to walk towards the small kitchen area. He stopped for a brief moment and looked out the window. There was a reason he chose this place. When looking for an apartment, he could just barely see it from here. The district that his clan once called home, rows upon rows of empty houses, shops where his clansmen would sell weapons or prepare meals and snacks with closely guarded recipes. They had been a small village unto themselves within Konoha. His family had once been that large, and it had been empty for nearly a decade. Tearing his eyes away, he continued his journey, reaching the kitchen and pulling out the ingredients to make onigiri. He was still more than a little irritated by Naruto's victory over the ice user. He didn't envy Naruto for having killed their opponent, not that he blamed him either. Much as he might not like the blonde, he would have felt the same if he hadn't made it in time and thought the masked boy had killed him. The revelations since then had been rather shocking. So the dead last was the survivor of a once great clan like himself, and the son of the fourth Hokage, no less. It hadn't been hard to put the pieces together on that. Once he realized the only reason to keep quiet about his father's identity was if he had enemies, but he was still trying to wrap around it, specifically the fact that no one had noticed, or at least no one noticed and said or did anything. He was observant enough to have noted that a lot of the blonde's behavior was the result of how he was treated, not the other way around. Once he knew that his parents' identity was a secret, it had seemed so obvious. There weren't that many big names that had anything in common with Naruto, all shinobi who had served under the man or worked alongside him, and no one even suspected. You'd think at least a few people who knew his father well would have reached out to him when he was treated like a pariah. And why was he treated like that anyway? Yeah, there was something fishy there, but he didn't have enough information to figure out what. He finished cooking and sat down at his table, silently eating the meal. He rarely wasted his time with the television, despite the decent one sitting against the wall at the side of his bed. Well, the blonde's heritage hardly mattered to him. That was something he'd admit he had in common with Naruto. You had to earn respect yourself. Unless he started showing the talents his clan or his father was known for, it wouldn't change his view of him. Interesting to know, but that was about it. After finishing his meal and then the cleanup, after he went to his room to prepare for a shower, as he did, he spied the only real personal effect in the house, the picture Team 7 took on the day they officially became a team. Kakashi eyes smiling as he ruffled his and Naruto's hair, Naruto glaring at him and Sakura smiling at the front. He thought of what his sensei had told them after the final battle in Wave, and briefly thought of his mother, that their mothers had been friends and had wanted them to be in turn. That he didn't know what to think about. Sakura had spent most of her time in her room since she got home, a brief detour to the kitchen to pick up a snack, a lackluster greeting to her parents, a shower, and then straight to bed, where she stared at the ceiling, and there she remained, her thoughts a jumbled mess of self-depreciation. In doing so, you saved an impoverished nation from a dark fate and granted them new hope. The words of Lord Third ran through her mind. Not only that, but you rekindled the wills of its downtrodden people. For this you should be proud, as I am to call you shinobi of this village. But I didn't do anything. She thought it was all Sasuke and Naruto. I can't even say I guarded Tazuna. The one time he needed protecting, it was from Zabuza. I may as well not have even been there. What had she been thinking? Back in the academy, doing the absolute minimum of training so she could focus on her looks, relying on academics to get her through in a profession where life and death battles were normal. She couldn't remember if she'd ever considered that would mean her teammates would have to carry her, that she would weigh them down when a screw-up could get them all killed. Stupid, so stupid. And she hadn't been a good teammate to them, had she? She'd put Naruto down at every opportunity. Sure, he was annoying, but still. And Sasuke, all she wanted right now was for him to smile at her, for him to feel as strongly for her as she had for him. But why would he? She'd let him know how she felt every chance she got. But had she ever helped or been there for him? Hell, she hadn't even considered that he was an orphan. She'd never done anything but fawn over him continuously. Isn't that more or less what Naruto did with her sometimes? Did he find that as annoying as she did? Suddenly she wasn't so annoyed at Naruto's crush, not because she had all returned it mind you, but because she was suddenly wondering why anyone would feel that way about her with how she acted. There was a knock on the door. "Sakura, are you okay?" Her mother's voice came through. "I'm fine, Mom," Sakura answered lied back. It must have been clear in her voice because her mother cracked open the door. Green eyes, a darker shade than her own, peeked into the room, a look of concern on her face. Her mother stood just short of 5 feet 7 inches and had short straight blonde hair that ended in a flare at her shoulders. She wore more or less a white version of Sakura's cheapao dress and white sandals. She looked fit as most kunoichi did, although she had long since stopped taking missions and more or less taken on civilian life as her husband had no surprise there. Sakura was grateful for that because her parents, they weren't very good ninja. Not that that wasn't the leaf calling the grass green. Case in point, neither had ever even made chunin. Her mother stepped into the room, looked at her daughter and sighed. "Yeah, I'm not buying it." She walked over and sat down on the bed. "Sakura, you've been blue ever since you got home. Don't try to tell me you haven't. Something happened on that mission." "What was it?" "It's nothing," Sakura denied, rolling to her side away from her mother. "Leave me alone." "Oh dear, I was afraid this day would come," Mabuki said, putting a hand to her face and shaking her head. "Sakura, you're becoming a teenager." Her daughter just scoffed. The woman looked to the ceiling sadly. "Whatever happened to the little girl who would tell me everything when she got home? It seems like just yesterday I was holding you while you were crying about the other kids poking fun at that cute forehead of yours, or you told me about how happy you were that you finally made a friend. Or I get it, Mom. Ah, see, that's more like it." Mabuki smiled at needling a reaction from her daughter. She placed a hand on her arm. "Now look, I was a child once too, and I may not have gone very far, but I am a kunoichi. I know how hard the shinobi life can hit you when you're just starting out. So tell me what happened." A few moments of silence passed as Sakura thought about whether or not to say anything. Finally she responded, "It just some things that got me thinking is all. Like, have I been wasting my time?" And she trailed off. "Oh boy, I know that feeling." Mabuki shook her head and then called out, "Kazashi, I think our daughter's taken one of those long hard looks at herself." Oh, looked into the mirror as she, her father's good-natured voice called back. In a few moments he joined them. "Well, that's no reflection on her. I do it all the time, Dad." Sakura groaned in exasperation. Soon Kazashi joined them. Her father was a man who stood just over 6 feet, with blue eyes and dull pink hair which he styled into her namesake cherry blossoms. He had a bit of stubble and sideburns that flowed into an angular mustache. He wore a simple green obi burgundy colored pants and a silver necklace with a pink cherry blossom design. He gave his daughter a kind smile as he sat down on the opposite end of the bed as her mother. "So, what did you see that's got you so down, and what brought it on in the first place?" her mother added. She sighed, knowing they weren't going to leave her alone, and so she caved. She told them everything of how she'd secretly agreed with Naruto about being fed up with the tediousness of D-rank missions, how glad she'd been to receive their first C-rank, the attack of those two Chunin, and the revelation that it was far more dangerous than advertised, their decision to press on, and their first encounter with Zabuza, revealing to them just how deep in it they were, the masked boy life in Wave, and finally the events on the bridge. Her parents had mostly stayed quiet, although they'd expressed anger at Kakashi-sensei deciding not to cancel the mission and come back. She didn't hold it against him. Everything had turned out alright for the most part, and who knows how things in Wave would have gone down if they'd assumed it was only a B-rank job and sent a bunch of Chunin they had been surprised that Naruto had been the hero of the day. As planned to free their sensei once again, all Naruto and Sasuke. She just stood there and watched how determined he'd been after hearing Inari's story, how he'd inspired the people of Wave and brought them out of despair, the apparent death of Sasuke, the real death of the masked boy, and how he'd reacted to it all. She'd seen them exchanging looks she couldn't read a few times. Well, first let me say good riddance to this Gato Mabuki, said, her face wrinkled in disgust at what the man had done here. Her father wholeheartedly agreed. He then smiled at her as he placed a hand on her shoulder. Now why does all this have you looking so glum? You helped save a nation on your first real mission, no less. You should be celebrating. No, I didn't, Sakura said dully. I didn't do anything, I just stood guard of Tazuna. It was all Sasuke, Naruto, and Kakashi-sensei. You don't think guarding the client's an important job? Mabuki asked in a deadpan, as if she thought she was being stupid. Not when I couldn't have protected him if my life depended on it, she said before grimacing slightly, which it would have, she added before looking away. If the masked kid or even those two Chunin we fought on the road had gotten past everyone else, I wouldn't have lasted 2 seconds, and the only time Tazuna was attacked it was Zabuza. We'd be dead if Kakashi-sensei hadn't saved us. What good's a guard who can't even protect herself? She sighed deeply as all the fights ran through her Mind again, Naruto and Sasuke saved Kakashi-sensei when Zabuza had him trapped. They fought the masked kid. Kakashi-sensei protected Tazuna the one time he needed it. Naruto inspired the people of Wave to stand up. I couldn't do anything. I can't even say I've ever helped them. All I've ever done is put Naruto down and fawn over Sasuke, and I can't even do that right. I mouth off about Naruto being an orphan in front of Sasuke. Her mother's grimace told her she agreed with how bad that was. I'm not a good ninja or a good person, am I? Sakura Kazashi began, but her mother cut him off. Well, if we're being honest, it was pretty low of you to break off your friendship with that Ino girl after she stood up for you. Mabuki began with a hand on her chin, earning a light glare from her husband. Sakura sat up and frowned at her mother. Are you going to tell me Sasuke isn't worth it? She dared her mother to tell her that true love wasn't something worth fighting over. Instead, her mother just made a single quiet laugh and gave her a lopsided grin. So she's a rival for the boy you like. Friendly rivalries are a thing, you know. Oh yeah, that's true, wasn't it? She'd seen them in some of the stories she'd read and on TV shows, so she'd broken the only real friendship she'd had with a girl who defended her from bullies when they first met. For nothing. Yep, another mark on the tally of proof. Sakura Haruno is a terrible person, but you're missing something very important here. Mabuki continued, looking at her seriously before smiling and placing a hand on her head. Sakura, you're a child. Exactly, you're barely in your teens. Kazashi agreed. Children make stupid mistakes. It's what you do, what we did when we were that age. The important thing is that you recognize them, learn from them, and do what you can to make up for them. He smiled at her. None of that is anything you can't fix or make up for, right? I guess not. Then try to figure out what you need to work on. What she needed to work on, the things she'd need to fix or make up for. She had some thinking to do. Kakashi sat at a table in his home, his head resting on his hand. He hummed quietly and thought as he closed his eye. He hadn't done a good job of leading those kids, had he? They hadn't been ready for that. Well, that was pretty obvious. He'd had to teach them the tree climbing exercise mid-mission. He was proud of them for having made it through, but was under no delusions that it wasn't a close call. Everything Lord Third had said to him was something he'd realized when they thought Sasuke was dead on the bridge. This was the first time he'd led a team of apprentices. He hadn't been on a team like this since he was under a Jonin sensei himself. Perhaps he'd been too hands-off when it came to training them. Had he been expecting too much when he decided to push on? Well, hindsight was 20/20, as they say. The more important part was, what was he going to do about it now? He'd need to step up their training. The Chunin exams were coming up and he wanted to enter them, which meant he'd need to work fast. Hopefully what happened in Wave would be a wake-up call for them too. He'd need to think of how best to nurture their talents. He'd need to get some litmus paper to check for their elements. Sakura was clearly dealing with feelings of inadequacy. Hopefully her parents would help with that. She was more likely to open up to them, but if it continued on, he'd step in. With any luck, it would help push her to actually apply herself. With her chakra control and her academic prowess, she had the makings of a great medical ninja and genjutsu specialist, but that was something of a problem for him. His genjutsu skills were a step above decent, but he was no master. His proficiency in that art beyond the basics came mainly from his Sharingan. As for medical ninjutsu, that would take too long with the time frame he was working with. Well, maybe not medical ninjutsu itself, but the knowledge that came with it could be useful. Anatomy, pressure points, and of course the art of making poisons and antidotes. Those were things she could work on by herself that would help her, not to mention improve her ability to handle simple injuries. In the meantime, it was a far cry from having a medic on the team, but it could still save lives or turn a potential failure into a success. He'd also need to pick up some scrolls on genjutsu for her. The only genjutsu specialist he knew was currently leading a team of her own. She needed a lot of work on the physical aspects of combat, and he'd need to work out what kind of style would best suit her if she decided to pursue medical ninjutsu later. Probably something centered around dodging Sasuke. Well, in his case, he didn't need anyone to push him, just some more guidance. And Naruto, well, after thinking about it a bit, he believed he had the perfect idea to take advantage of his natural attributes and his impromptu plan to save him from Zabuza, not to mention learning the Shadow Clone Jutsu in only a few hours showed that he had untapped talent. He'd need some brushing up in every category, but his strategy should help that immensely. He'd probably want to explore his clan's talent too. He could help with that, but the chains, he couldn't help him there. He knew some of what they could do, but had no idea how to do any of it, and it was all far beyond Naruto's current level anyway. The best he could do there is help improve Naruto's control of chakra, and he'd be doing that for all of them anyway. And when he thought about it, he really should have been there more for the kid, for his sensei's son. He knew what it was like to be an orphan, knew how the villagers would treat him in the wake of the Kyuubi attack, but he'd been too busy dealing with his own losses and pouring himself into his work as a coping mechanism. He recalled how Minato-sensei had tried so many different tactics to help pull him from that same mentality after his last teammate's death. He would be so disappointed, right? He had a lot to make up for so help with their elements push Sakura to train and study the body and poisons work on Naruto's knowledge and improve their taijutsu help Sasuke with the Sharingan and help Naruto improve his skill with the chains as best he could. Okay, he had a plan. He made a note of which stores to visit for the supplies he needed. At least tomorrow he'd have a reason to be late. Naruto sat on the roof of his apartment complex, staring at the face of the fourth Hokage's monument, his father's face. He still had conflicting emotions about that, but they'd mostly settled. He couldn't say he completely understood or forgave him, but he chose to believe what Hiruzen did, that his father had trusted him. He looked down at the piece of paper in his hand, the only thing that Hiruzen had given him, given the secret around his parents, a picture of his mother, a slender woman with long red hair that Hiruzen told him was common for their clan, and violet eyes, fair skin as opposed to his own, but he could see he got his face from her. She wore a high-collared sleeveless blouse under a green dress. She was smiling widely, a hand on her hip and a fist pumped in the air. It was a warm feeling knowing that his parents had loved him, especially after he'd learned about the QB, but in a way it hurt more knowing now just what had been taken from him. Hiruzen had told him how excited they'd been when they'd found out they would be parents, how much they'd cared for each other, and he'd never gotten to meet them. The fourth Hokage, that brought him back to something else that had been weighing on his mind. To be Hokage means to protect all in this village, to serve as a pillar of support for everyone and mark the road for its people to follow. Well, his father and the old man certainly did that. The third, who had once told him that everyone in this village was his family, who did everything he could to be there for him and everyone else's father, who gave everything for this village. He had a long way to go. What would his parents see if they saw him now? What kind of example was he setting for others to follow? Right, well, no better time than the present to get started. Pocketing the picture of his mother and giving one last look to the Hokage monument, he silently went inside. He walked down the stairs and made his way to his apartment. Turning the key and opening the door, he looked around and grimaced. Trash everywhere, flies around the appliances, fridge probably half filled with spoiled goods. He tried to take care of the place when he was younger, but all too often he'd find himself too downhearted by the villagers' looks or something his teacher did to bother. Put that together with the fact that no one ever visited him aside from Iruka and the old man who usually took him out, and at some point he just stopped caring. The old man had told him a lot about his father. He said that he'd been meticulous. He'd be pretty embarrassed if he knew this was how his son lived. To say nothing of what his mother would say. He shivered as one story that the old man had shared in particular came to him, the story of how the other kids had teased his mother relentlessly about how her round face and red hair when she was in the academy, they said it made her look like a tomato. They kept this up until she snapped and beat the ever-loving crap out of all of them, her red hair whipping in every direction like a demon's, and that was before she'd had the fox sealed inside of her. That event had earned her a new nickname, the red hot-blooded habanero. He had a feeling that if she could see this, he'd be on the receiving end of that temper. Yeah, that would be a decent enough first step. Now that he thought about it, living like this couldn't be a good idea, could it? He put his hands together in a cross-shaped sign, shadow clone jutsu, and a burst of smoke. 5 copies of his appeared. All right guys, you know what to do. And with cheers of agreement, Naruto and his clones got to cleaning up the mess he'd been living in for the last half-decade. Time skip. Why am I not surprised? Naruto ground out as he leaned back against the wooden pole, staring at the sky above. Here he was with Sasuke and Sakura at the 3rd training ground, the place where Team 7 had officially formed, and the place where Kakashi-sensei had told them they'd be meeting today. As per usual, it was well over an hour past when he said they'd meet, and the man was nowhere in sight. How is this fair? He tells us to meet him and keeps us waiting every day, Sakura yelled in frustration. Sasuke meanwhile remained silent as he leaned against one of the 3 logs sticking up from the ground. Naruto was glad to see that a night at home seemed to have done Sakura some good. She seemed to be back to her energetic old self for the most part. He'd been worrying about her. I wish he didn't have us meet in different places every time, then I could set something up to get back at him for leaving us hanging, Naruto growled, crossing his arms before he grinned at Sakura. Say, think he'd agree if we invited him for ramen or something? I bet I could come up with something good if I put my mind to it. I wouldn't try it, Sakura answered back. After seeing what he's like in the field, I get the feeling he was just humoring us with that eraser thing. I doubt he'd really fall for something like that. Naruto clicked his tongue. Yeah, you're probably right. Next time I'm bringing a book or something, Sakura growled, hands on her hips as she began to tap her foot. Well, isn't that a coincidence? I happen to have brought a few books for you. Kakashi's voice rang out, causing the genin to look to the river behind them. Kakashi appeared in a burst of smoke, giving them his eyes smile and a wave. Sorry I'm late. I had to help a kid find his lost pet. Your excuses suck, sensei, Naruto deadpanned while Sakura raised a trembling fist in the silver-haired man's direction. Then what he said clicked and she was caught flat-footed. "Wait, you've got a book for me?" she asked, looking at him in confusion. "Among other things," Kakashi replied as his sole visible eye roamed over his students. "I feel I may have taken a bit too much of a laissez-faire approach to training you." His gaze settled on Naruto. "In all honesty, I should have taught you the tree climbing exercise and more quite a bit before we took that mission to Wave." He then smiled again, and pulled out a small sheet of paper, holding it between two fingers. "So from here on out we'll be taking fewer missions and doing more training." Kakashi-sensei, what's that?" Sakura asked, clearly as lost as he was on what a sheet of paper would do for them. "Oh, this is known as chakra induction paper." Kakashi told them it's used to test one's elemental affinity. While you can learn how to use any element, everyone has one they have a natural inclination for. That one will be more powerful and easier for them to use. All you have to do is channel your chakra into this paper, and at that moment the paper suddenly crinkled in his hand, and voila, how it reacts tells you the holder's affinity. Mine's lightning, so the paper wrinkles with the water element. It gets wet. Fire, it burns to ash. Earth, it turns to dirt, and with wind it'll split in two. Cool, so you're going to use that to figure out what kind of jutsu to teach us?" Naruto asked excitedly. That more than made up for him being late. "That's right," Kakashi nodded. "Oh, incidentally, a little tidbit you might want to know: you need to have mastered a minimum of 2 elements to qualify to become a Jonin. A bit far off, but it's something to keep in mind if you don't want to stop at Chunin. Now let's get started." The Jonin held out 3 sheets of paper. The Genin stepped forward, joining Kakashi at the river's edge, and took 1 slip of paper each. They paused, staring at their sheets for a few moments before one by one channeling chakra into them. Sasuke's was first burning to ash. Sakura's crumbled away while Naruto's split in half. "Well, looks like Naruto and Sakura have the wind and earth affinities. Sasuke's fire is no surprise. That's the norm for the Uchiha clan." Kakashi noted. "It's fitting from what I've seen of your styles. Wind is an offense-oriented element, known for cutting and piecing foes, though you can also project solid walls of wind for defense. It's also very effective when combined with fire. Wind will feed the flames and intensify them. Earth, on the other hand, is pretty balanced. You can make blunt force or piercing stones, summon walls of earth, and traverse the ground for sneak attacks. It offers a wide range of possibilities." Yeah, we're going to kicking ass and taking names." Naruto grinned widely, punching an open palm. "But before we start on that, we'll be working on improving your chakra control." Again, yes, proper control of your chakra is important. In fact, it's likely why you kept failing in the academy." Kakashi replied. "Wait, what?" Naruto asked in confusion. Kakashi nodded. "The more chakra you have, the more difficult it is to control. While it gives you a lot of stamina, you waste a lot of extra energy on techniques. Worse, some techniques like the clone jutsu, for example, and genjutsu in general, require refined chakra control or have pretty strict requirements. Overload them and they won't work at all." His gaze then turned to Sasuke. "Sasuke possess an exceptional amount of chakra for your age." He then turned to Naruto. "But you, by any standards, the amount of chakra you possess are enormous." For a brief moment Naruto was excited to hear that, then that withered on the vine as he remembered why he had so much chakra. Sakura raised a brow beside him before she turned to her sensei. "So the reason Naruto kept failing the academy's test is that he couldn't control his chakra well enough to use the clone jutsu because he has so much of it?" Sakura asked, seeming to wonder how much chakra he had for that to be the case. From how she was looking at him, that's right, he likely would have passed the normal way had someone thought to take him aside and help him refine his chakra control. Kakashi replied. "But I've thought of a way to take advantage of that." "And Naruto, have you ever noticed that you remember things you shouldn't when you use the shadow clone jutsu?" Naruto hummed in thought, crossing his arms as he racked his brain for what his sensei could mean. "Okay, maybe a demonstration is in order." And with that he created a single shadow clone that immediately began to walk off into the nearby forest. "Naruto, create a shadow clone of your own and have it follow mine." The blonde did so, and they waited. "So what are we waiting on?" Naruto blinked as thoughts came rushing to him. Sasuke frowned while Sakura looked curious. "What is it?" she asked. "My clone beat Kakashi in rock paper scissors, right?" Kakashi said. "You see, when a shadow clone disperses, no matter how that is, its remaining chakra and all of its memories return to the user." Naruto probably would have noticed had he used the clones in any way other than having them work or fight alongside him. If my theory is right, then this should apply to accumulated experience as well, meaning if you have 5 shadow clones working with you on learning a new skill, you should progress 5 times faster. Naruto began to raise a cheer in excitement, but there's a catch that caused Naruto to stop. "The mental fatigue will carry over too, and if you spread your chakra too thin, you won't be able to accomplish anything. You're probably the only one here who can take full advantage of this training, and it'll probably leave you barely on your feet." "Well, I'm up for it." This was great. With this he'd catch up to Sasuke in no time. "Actually, now that I think about it, Sakura might be able to some make use of this too." Kakashi put a hand on his chin. All three were surprised. Even Sasuke raised his brows before looking at Sakura in confusion. Sakura seemed perplexed. She then began frantically waving her hands in front of her. Whoa. Whoa, what are you talking about, sensei? I don't have that much chakra. You don't, Kakashi affirmed, and Sakura stopped moving. In fact, with the amount of chakra you have, I'd normally recommend you not use this jutsu at all, and certainly not for training. The pink-haired girl seemed to deflate at that, but as I said, I have some reading material for you, or maybe homework would be a good way to put it. With that, Kakashi pulled out a scroll from his flak jacket, and kneeled down, unfurling it on the ground. Before placing a hand on the seal at the center of the paper, in a burst of smoke, several books and scrolls appeared. Sakura, looking at your talents, I believe you have excellent potential for medical ninjutsu as well as genjutsu. Really? Yes, both require fine chakra control, which you seem to have a gift for. The latter requires you have a deep understanding of chemicals in the body, which should be right up your alley given your academic record. Now, I'm no specialist, but I can help you with genjutsu. Medical ninjutsu, on the other hand, is not something I have any experience in, and quite frankly it would take too long for you to explore on the deadline I'm looking at. It as Genin's quizzical gaze, he added, more on that later. Anyway, while medical ninjutsu might be out of the question now, the knowledge that goes with it, anatomy, pressure points, and with them where and how to hit someone for maximum effect, how to identify and create poisons and antidotes that could be helpful, hence your homework. With that, he gestured to the books before him. I want you to study these while at home. The shadow clone jutsu might be useful on that front, since you'll only be studying and won't use any chakra. His voice became harsher as his gaze sharpened, carrying an authority they hadn't heard outside of the battles with Zabuza. Let me stress that you are not to use this technique outside of studying, not in training, and definitely not in the field. And don't use more than one clone with the amount of chakra you'd run the risk of dangerous levels of chakra exhaustion. Sakura shivered slightly, and Naruto didn't blame her. He knew enough to know chakra exhaustion was dangerous stuff. Don't worry, I understand, sensei. Good, well, I guess I'll be teaching you that technique then, Kakashi said with a shrug. Alright, we'll be working on a more advanced chakra control exercise for the first hour of training. And with that, he turned away and walked towards the river. Naruto's eyes widened as he stepped on the water's surface and walked across it as if it was solid ground. Oh yeah, he remembered his sensei and Zabuza fighting on the water the first time they were going to learn that. Awesome, you'll be learning to walk on water for the next hour. Afterward, we'll be working on your taijutsu skills. Naruto, I want you to create 8 clones. I want 3 to accompany you in this exercise, for we'll get started on wind element training, and the last will be brushing up on things you clearly need a refresher course on from the academy. Let's see how well you handle that before we consider moving on to adding to that number. Naruto nodded and did as he was told. In a burst of smoke, 8 doppelgangers appeared around him in short order. They were all working on their assigned tasks. The 3 genin stood at the edge of the river looking determined. Okay, now I want you to run onto the water using your chakra to repel it, and keep from falling into the river. You're going to feel the difference between this and tree climbing very quickly. The shifting surface of the water will force you to adjust your chakra by the moment, or you'll fall. And stop and focus on keeping above the water when you feel you have to, but try to get as far as you can. Okay, and go. The 3 immediately took off running. The moment Naruto's foot touched the water, he immediately knew what Kakashi had been talking about. He could feel the way it moved under his feet, the way his soles would waver between standing solidly and being dragged under by gravity, and the whole thing threw his sense of balance out the window. He made it 3 steps before he had to stop, holding out his arms to keep upright as he struggled to maintain control. Sasuke made it a lot farther, 8 steps before he came to a near standstill. Even so, he kept moving, fighting to keep standing before taking one quick step forward. Sakura made it even farther, though she was forced to walk. She even managed to stay steady. Almost. Naruto lasted about 10 seconds before he slipped into the water with a splash. 5 hours later, training for the day had been complete, and the 3 genin were on the ground. Naruto had fallen onto his butt and leaned back, propping himself up with his hands, his shoulders heaving as he panted heavily. He was sore all over. Kakashi had hit him hard whenever he'd made a mistake, and he'd made a lot of mistakes. Sakura was lying on her back a ways away, staring listlessly at the sky where she'd fallen at the end of her own training session. Sasuke sat on one of the posts, an arm on his knee. He had mostly recovered, the only sign of his own training/beating being the scuffles on his clothes. Kakashi's taijutsu session had been grueling. He'd had them come at him one by one, making sure to hammer in every flaw in their fighting style. Naruto had been the last, and his fighting style had overall needed the most work. Kakashi had said Naruto fought more like a brawler than a trained shinobi, not really even having a fighting style at all. Still, He had the trained reflexes shinobi were known for in strength and speed. To make up for it, he winced as he looked over at Sakura lying on the ground. Sakura didn't even have that much going for her. Oh, she fought with a style, but it was pretty clear she hadn't done much practice and her physical abilities were, well, Kakashi had said, subpar. That was the kindest way he could put it. She'd gotten the worst of this first session, all right. I think I have a good idea of what you need to work on, Kakashi said, nodded to himself. Good work, let's call it a day. Wait a minute, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto interjected, his breathing starting to calm him. What is it? Naruto took a breath and rose to his feet, looking at his sensei with determination. I was wondering, can you teach me sealing jutsu? You want to try out your clan's art? Kakashi asked rhetorically. Before thinking about it, well, I'm not sure you're suited for it. Just because your clan excelled in it doesn't necessarily mean you will. Naruto deflated a bit at that, but we won't know until we try. I was just waiting for you to ask, to be honest. Now the blonde looked up in excitement. It's a bit more involved, so we'll handle it more like a tutoring session. I'll come by your place a few hours after we've trained, give you time to cool off, and then we'll see what you can do. Keep in mind there's going to be a lot of reading involved, but I'll try to make more practical exercises since you seemed to learn better by doing. Thanks, Kakashi-sensei. Iruka made his way up the familiar stairs that led to Naruto's apartment. The sun had made it 3/4 of the way across the sky to the horizon. The Chunin figured that by now Naruto would be back from training or a mission. He'd been worried about his former student after what he heard happen on his sea. Should have been an A-rank mission that had surprised him, especially when he'd learned that they'd found out the client had lied midway to wave and kept going anyway. He'd wanted to tear into Kakashi for that one. Taking experienced genin on a B-rank or even A-rank mission was one thing, but green ones who'd never been on a mission that wasn't basically a chore. But he was sure that anything he had to say, the third had already said. The fact that he'd learned that Naruto had had his first kill was a far more pressing concern on his mind. Reaching the blonde's apartment, Iruka knocked on the door. Naruto, you there? He waited for a few seconds, then he heard the latch click. Naruto opened the door and smiled up at his former sensei. Hey Iruka-sensei, good to see you. Iruka chuckled. Same to you, Naruto. He then looked past the blonde and his eyebrows rose. What had once been something of a pigsty had now decently clean, not perfect, but a vast improvement on what was there before. The trash had been picked up, no signs of leftover food. The sink was clear. Looks like someone finally decided to do some picking up around the house. Naruto chuckled, smiling widely as he rubbed the back of his head. Yeah, it was kinda gross. This was a good sign. The blonde seemed to be in high spirits as usual. The scarred Chunin knew Kakashi would help him through processing it and that some time had passed, but he knew from personal experience that this kind of thing lingered with you, plus it had been a while since he saw his favorite student. Well, I'm glad to see you took some initiative on it, Iruka replied before pointing his thumb behind him. You up for some ramen? You know it. Our Lord Third told you about the Uzamaki clan? Iruka asked, blinking in surprise as he and Naruto sat at the blonde's favorite ramen stand. You knew? Naruto responded in shock. The instructor could only rub the back of his head sheepishly. Sorry, kind of slipped my mind. People don't really like talking about the Uzumaki clan after what happened. He really only knew vague details. What he did know, everyone who was an active shinobi at the time felt they shouldn't have missed the attack that destroyed the ill-fated village. They considered their failure to save them a disgrace and didn't like being reminded of it. It wasn't a taboo subject, but it was close enough that it wouldn't occur to most to bring it up, himself included. He couldn't help but feel a bit ashamed of that. Learning he had a heritage to live up to might have lit a fire in the boy and compelled him to train harder. Yeah, the old man told me that, Naruto said, trailing off and staring into the steaming bowl before him. Iruka's face fell. He imagined it was a mixed feeling, finding out he came from a big family with a legacy to live up to after being on his own for so long, but at the same time he found out they were gone and that he wasn't likely to meet any of them. Feeling now was as good a time as any to broach the subject. Iruka asked, so how are you holding up after the mission? I mean, Naruto flinched slightly, clearly guessing what he meant. Alright, I guess from what Kakashi-sensei told me anyway. He looked to his former sensei. Is it normal to have nightmares after all this time? Yeah, Iruka trailed off before asking, want to talk about it? Naruto proceeded to give him a more detailed account of what happened during the mission. The Chunin grimaced as he thought about it. Yeah, he can definitely understand seeing red at the death of a comrade. He knew the blonde must be beating himself up after finding out the boy faked it and meant to spare them all along, given who his master was. You couldn't have known he'd do that. I mean, he followed someone who killed 100 academy students when he was just a boy. I know, Naruto responded. Iruka sighed, but knowing that doesn't make you feel better. Yeah, I understand. There was a moment of silence before Naruto spoke again. I don't know when I felt worse, when I really realized I'd killed that guy, when he'd only faked killing Sasuke, or when I thought Sasuke was dying in my arms because I'd been stupid. Just be thankful your teammates still Alive Iruka advised that situation could have turned out any number of ways, some a lot worse than others. Yeah, I know. There was a moment of silence before Iruka broke it. So how have things been going with your team since then? Naruto smiled. Pretty good, I guess. Sasuke's the same as always, but I think he talks even less than he did before. Sakura hasn't yelled at me for the last few weeks. Kakashi-sensei's been training us harder. He really worked us into the ground today. We were all beat when we went home, but he's still late every day. It's crazy. What could he be doing that takes so much time? I don't know him that well, but he's got a reputation for being late whenever he can afford to be. My suggestion: take something light you can do that won't tire you out for whatever he's got in mind. To every meeting, Iruka said. Naruto frowned before shrugging it. Better than waiting around for Kakashi-sensei every day. And with that he went back to his bowl, drinking down the last of it. He sighed as he set it down, only for another to be placed in front of him. I figured you could use another. You usually go for a few rounds, Tochi said, smiling at his favorite customer. I happened to overhear you had a rough time of it, so this one's on the house. Thanks, old man. Tochi, haha, don't mention it, the old man replied with a hearty laugh. And don't shy away if you're feeling down, okay? I am added. We may not be shinobi, but we're here if you need to talk, okay? Iruka smiled, thankful for the reminder that some cared for the blonde. Sakura looked at herself in the mirror, her eyes determined. She thought long and hard on her father's advice, on what she needed to work on and make up for. There was still a lot she needed to figure out, but she had a good starting point. The first thing that had come to her mind was her team. So far she hadn't really contributed anything besides taking up some of the work on D-rank missions. She'd done a bit to help Naruto when he was dealing with the aftermath of the battle on the bridge, but that was massively outweighed by how she'd put him down before. She'd never really done anything for Sasuke, and if they were to go on any dangerous mission now, even an actual C rank, she knew she'd probably just slow them down. That had to change. Being there for them would be tough. Sakura didn't even know where to begin, but it was easy enough to not yell at Naruto for every little thing. Of course he hadn't actually done anything to annoy her lately, but still she just had to keep in mind to be kinder and more considerate to Naruto and more supportive of both of them. Really supportive, not just toadying when it came to Sasuke. And she needed to stop being dead weight, and that meant she needed to train. Kakashi had taken to teaching them how to fight more effectively, and wow, had he hammered into her head how much work she needed. But it wouldn't be enough to just train her skills. She needed to be faster, stronger, and that meant some personal training. The books Kakashi had given her were lying on her bed. She'd get started on that later tonight. Unfortunately she didn't have the shadow clone jutsu down yet, but she was sure she would soon enough. For now she needed to exercise, but where to start? Sakura considered her options for a moment before deciding to try out a ninja tool shop. They'd have to have something that would help speed things up, and maybe some advice if it was run by an actual ninja. She nodded to herself and made her way to the door. Once outside she considered where she should start. She knew the weapon shop she used was probably a no-go, as she knew it was run by civilians. They might be able to help her, but she still thought a ninja-run shop would be her best bet. She remembered a shop she used to pass by on her way to the academy and decided to try that one out first. No luck. The shop owner knew his tools but didn't have much advice for training beyond the standard, so she continued her search. 2 shops later and Sakura hadn't found much other than disappointment. They had in fact been run by civilians, and so they hadn't had much advice for her on where to start. They did at least offer quality gear, but she'd had a decent supply of weapons, so that hadn't offered her anything. She could only hope this one would have what she was looking for. As the door creaked open she heard a voice within the store. Yo Tenji, is my order in yet? The pink-haired girl stepped inside the store to see a slightly older girl standing at the counter talking to the shop owner. She was a bit taller than Sakura, with dark brown hair shaped into 2 buns. She wore a pink sleeveless cheapao blouse with yellow buttons and dark green pants. Why yes indeed, just came in fact. Sorry for the delay, the shopkeeper said, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. He was a man who looked to be in his late 40s, wearing a simple white shirt, black pants, and a forge apron. He was tall, standing slightly higher than her sensei, with a muscular build almost like a bodybuilder. He had short black hair cut flat at the top and coal-colored eyes. That's okay, just let me see the goods. I've gotta keep my arsenal stocked up, she said, leaning forward onto the counter, and Sakura could practically hear the smile in her voice. The man laughed. You got it, only the best for my #1 customer. He turned around and walked behind the draped doorway that led to the back. As Sakura walked into the store, the girl turned to see her, allowing the pink-haired girl to see she had eyes that matched her hair. She gave her a cheerful wave. Hey there, you look lost. Huh? Yeah, I guess I am. Sakura shrugged. I usually only come to places like this to buy tools. Oh, looking for something new? The girl asked conversationally. Maybe I can help out. Name's 1010. By the way, you Sakura? Haruno, the pink-haired girl returned before looking around, focusing on training equipment. I'm looking for something to kickstart my training. but I barely know where to start. The other shopkeepers were civilians, so they couldn't really tell me anything besides the obvious. Tenten raised a brow and gave Sakura an appraising eye after looking at her forehead protector. Just getting started. Yeah, I kinda have a lot to make up for now. Tenten looked a little irked, resting an arm on the counter. You're one of those fangirls who don't take being a kunoichi seriously, aren't you? Sakura cringed. Yeah, that pretty much summed up how she'd been until now. She could understand why Tenten was annoyed. She probably had experience with people like her. While she thought her academics marked her as a great ninja in the making before, she could see now how someone like her would give kunoichi a bad name. She could deny it, but she wouldn't. She was facing her mistakes and moving past them, and that meant owning up to them. I was my team, and I had our first real mission not too long ago. It was bad. I couldn't do anything but stand on the sidelines. She stood up straight and looked at the older girl resolutely. It was a wake-up call. I want to change. I want to be able to fight beside them instead of holding them back like I did before. So here I am. Tenten seemed to weigh her words before smiling. Well, in that case I'll be happy to help. She then frowned. Though from what I know of your type, my first bit of advice is stop dieting. She stressed those last two words. Your body needs fuel. You know, you need calories and the right nutrients to build up muscle. If you don't eat right, it could slow or even kill your progress. Sakura grimaced. She hadn't even thought of that. Yeah, that makes sense. Tenten sighed and ran a hand through her hair. Where to begin? It was at that point that the shopkeeper returned from the back. He was holding a pretty large roll, big enough that he had to carry it on his shoulders. Here you go, everything you asked for. With that, he unfurled it on the counter, and while it covered the whole thing, there were dozens, probably well over 100 different weapons inside. Shuriken, kunaikus, origami, daggers, short swords, you name it. If it was smaller than a katana, it was probably there. Whoa, overkill much, she thought as Tenten ran back to the counter. As if all that weren't enough, he added 3 scrolls on top of that, though apparently there was enough trust between them that Tenten didn't feel the need to test it. Her eyes gleamed as she looked over the various pointy objects before she hurriedly took out a check. Nice, thanks old man. No thank you, he said, taking the check. She wasn't surprised. He was grateful. If Tenten made purchases like that all the time, she probably half paid to keep him in business by herself. That was an exaggeration, of course, probably. So who's this friend of yours? Tenji asked, looking to her while the bun-haired brunette pulled out a sealing scroll of her own, sealed away the roll of weapons, and put all four in her pouch. Oh, just a rookie looking to better herself. The obviously a weapons specialist answered before gesturing an open hand towards her. Tenji, this is Sakura. Sakura, let me introduce you to Tenji, one of the best weapon dealers in the village. The shop owner rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. I hardly think so, but I'm not going to turn down free advertisement, he said with a chuckle, before turning a grin to the pink-haired girl. So looking for something to help in training, I take it? At her nod, he stepped out from behind the counter and put a hand to his chin. How about some arm and leg weights to start with? Tenten suggested. He shrugged. Yeah, good as place as any. He gestured for her to follow as he walked over to a far wall with all sorts of training equipment on display. Sakura was doubtful. Arm and leg weights? Tenten nodded. Yeah, sounds simple, but they really do help. You've just gotta make sure you use both or you'll screw up your balance, unless you're looking to focus on punches or kicks, or you want to make yourself a speed freak. Here we go, he said, placing his hands on a display. These are top of the line. You could go with the standard weights and have to switch them out whenever you're looking to increase the weight, or you could use these. The objects on display looked like standard wrist and ankle guards. These babies have sealing jutsu engraved on the inside. Just channel chakra into them to increase the weight. Too much, just touch and release the chakra inside, like any sealing scroll, and it goes back to normal. Just don't go overboard with all of them at once and turn yourself into a living floor mat. And they're perfect for training, he said with a laugh that said he probably knew people who'd turned themselves into anchors with these things. Okay, that was pretty neat. So how much for them? The pink-haired genin asked, thinking in the back of her mind she should get some for Naruto and Sasuke too. While she was at it, it would help them out just the same, and it'd be a good first step towards being a truly helpful teammate. 5,200 Ryo a set. That's wrist or ankle guards, not both. Sakura stared for a moment, then her eyes bugged out into large pits of solid white. What? Tell me they aren't worth it though. To be fair, you could get the same result for free if you're good with sealing jutsu, or if you know someone who is. He raised a brow. You got those skills, or got a friend who does? Well, nice of him to give her an out. Unfortunately, she wasn't sure she did. Kakashi said he'd tutor Naruto in the art, but she didn't know for sure how good he was. Besides, if he could have done something like this, wouldn't he have suggested it already? She then remembered how he didn't teach them the tree climbing exercise until they were on an A-rank mission. Suddenly she wasn't so sure. She turned to look forlornly at the training tools. 31200 Ryo plus tax. This would wipe out her entire savings, everything she'd saved up before graduation, and all the pay from Their missions she could only barely afford it because of that time they captured Tora. The one reason that there wasn't a strike on that particular mission despite how annoying that cat was and how many times it got away, it was owned by the wife of the fire daimyo. That meant refusal was not an option and the pay was good. Well, going to go for it? 1010 asked by her side. Personally, I don't really have a preference, and my teammate prefers the old-fashioned kind, but it's your choice. Sakura looked at the display before mentally kissing her savings goodbye. I'll take 3 sets of each. Sakura stared at the scroll that now contained her newly bought training gear as she walked down the road, her face slightly pale. Wow, really generous of you to buy some for your teammates too, 1010 said, raising a brow. It was for the team, Sakura replied in monotone. After how I acted, I owe them. This is the least I can do, she said without a hint of emotion. Well, nice to know you're serious about making it up to them, 1010 said with a sympathetic smile. Sakura got the feeling she'd probably blown all her money on weapons at one point or another. Got any more advice? Yeah, get a light start tonight, but talk to your sensei before doing anything too extreme. You don't want to overdo it when you're just starting out. Pace yourself, and once you get used to it, start pushing harder, 1010 continued as Sakura nodded absent-mindedly, thoughts still on her empty savings. The brunette seemed to take pity on her. Let's talk more over lunch, my treat. She gave a slight laugh. I get the feeling you won't be eating out on your own for a while. Sakura grimaced. Yeah, thanks. Anywhere you want to go in particular? Sakura closed her eyes and set aside all thought of her practically non-existent bank account with some difficulty. This would probably be the last time she could eat out in a while. Might as well get what she liked best. How about the Nakamura's Dango shop? Sounds good to me. It didn't take too long for the 2 girls to make it to the shop. Sakura ordered her favorite and Mitsu, while 1010 just went with the shop's signature dish. So what's your team like? 1010 asked after swallowing the first bite of her dango. Sakura looked up from her and Mitsu before looking to the sky. Well, there's Sasuke Uchiha. She curled in on herself and blushed. The guy you like? 1010 guessed. She nodded. He's just so cool. He was at the top of our class. He's always aloof, never lets anything get to him. He's just so dreamy. Hair reminds me of my teammate, 1010 commented. The aloof part one mean not that I want to ask him out or anything. His name's Niji Hyuga, always serious, kinda on the cold side, but that's a bit of a breath of fresh air on my team. Oh, Sakura voiced curiously. 1010 tilted her head back and placed a hand on her head, looking like she'd gotten a headache. My other teammate, Rock Lee, and my sensei guy are kinda nuts. No, I take that back, they are nuts. They're always so intense, then train until you drop types and always screaming about the power of youth. She said the last words in an ardent voice before looking to the side, her expression a combination of annoyed and exhausted. They make these insane challenges for themselves all the time, like if I can't do 500 squats then I will do 600 push-ups, or if I can't do 300 sit-ups I will do 100 laps around the village. She sighed. I just wish they'd cool down and grow up a bit. Sakura chuckled. Sounds tough, but at least your sensei makes you work hard. Mine was hands off, to put things lightly. He's only now starting to shape up after we almost got killed. 1010 frowned. What would happen? Sakura waved her hand. Long story the short version. The client lied about what we were up against. The bun-haired girl's face wrinkled in exasperation. Oh, one of those. Well, his whole country was in a bad way, so I get why he did it, but still. Sakura sighed. It took that to get him to teach us how to climb trees with Chakra. 1010 seemed surprised, then frustrated. What are you kidding? That's one of the first things Guy Sensei taught us. Yeah, looking back I thought that was something we should have worked on earlier. Ugh, the younger Kunoichi shook her head. Well, at least he's actually trying now. Really drove us into the ground the other day. It's tough, but I think it's better than him leaving us to train by ourselves, unless it's literally life and death. Suddenly I find myself appreciating Guy Sensei. 1010 said dully. Just a little. Sakura smirked. My other teammate is Naruto Uzumaki. Remember the kid who graffitied the Hokage monument? 1010 chuckled. Oh geez, how can I forget? Still can't believe no one noticed until he was almost done. He's a show-off and a loudmouth, and he can be kinda stupid, but he's the kinda guy who's always willing to lend a hand to someone in need. Though I only saw that recently, she said, thinking of how determined he was to pull Inari from his isolation and despair. Well, sounds like your team got off to a rough start. Here's hoping better days are ahead, she said, raising her dango in mock salute. Here. The next day once again saw the 3 genin of Team 7 waiting on their sensei in the 3rd training ground, clearly in no rush to break his habit of being late all the time. Today, however, things were much quieter than usual. Usually Naruto and Sakura would be climbing up the walls railing against Kakashi for keeping them waiting again. Not today, however, but the Reason why had both Sasuke and Sakura raising a brow today. Naruto had his nose buried in a book, as did the pink-haired girl. Well, not just that, he was also writing things out, occasionally looking back to his book and grumbling at some imperfection in his work. Naruto had to admit he could understand why they were surprised. He was the dead last in the academy, and he usually blew off studying when it wasn't about ninjutsu or something cool. It did somewhat surprise him that Sasuke was the first to voice his curiosity. "What are you doing, Naruto?" And Naruto looked up from his work, eyebrows raised that the question came from Sasuke. Before he shrugged, "Oh, I'm just working on my sealing jutsu. Kakashi-sensei told me to write out the symbols until I memorized what they mean. They're not all kanji, you know, but he's having me practice writing that out too. Need to get it all down as fast and neat as possible. One wrong symbol and the whole thing falls apart." He gave me some low-level seals to work out. When I think I'm up to it, thought I could get a little extra practice, and since we've got nothing better to do. Sasuke gave a grunt of acknowledgement and looked away, satisfied with the answer. The blonde went back to his work. 2 more hours went by before their sensei deigned to show himself, walking into the clearing as if nothing was wrong. "Morning, guys," he said with a wave. "Late as always," Naruto accused, pointing at him. "Are you ever going to be on time?" Sakura yelled, raising a fist. Sasuke's expression said that he'd enjoyed the quiet while it had lasted. "Well, at least this time you two had something to keep you occupied," Kakashi commented before his gaze turned to the Uchiha heir. "Give you any ideas, Sasuke?" Sasuke grunted in response before saying a few. "Well, that's good. At least you won't all be standing around wasting time just waiting every day. You're the reason we're always waiting." Naruto and Sakura cried in unison. Now, let's not point fingers," Kakashi said with his eyes smile. "Now then, for today will actually Sensei," Sakura interrupted, raising her hand as if they were still in the academy. "I've got something to add to our training." Naruto looked at Sakura in mild shock. Even Sasuke raised a brow. It was pretty clear to anyone who spent time with her that Sakura didn't do much training after all. Back in wave after she got to the top of the tree, rather than continuing to practice or doing something else, she just stopped training altogether. Looking back, maybe he should have said something about that. "Oh." Kakashi seemed interested. Sakura picked up a bag she brought with her and reached inside, pulling out wrist and arm guards. "You got us protective gear?" Sasuke asked skeptically. "They're a lot more than that," Sakura replied. "They're actually training weights. This gear's lined with seals that get heavier the more chakra you put in them, so you can control how much they weigh you down. You can release it all like a sealing scroll to return them to normal." She smiled. "I got a complete set for each of us while I was out the other day." "Oh wow, yeah, that was one way to speed up your training, and it was a gift from Sakura." "Awesome." He was already planning to wear them whenever he wasn't on a mission or something, not to mention taking a look at those seals. Even Sasuke looked mildly impressed. "Wow, thanks, Sakura," Naruto said as he took his. "Yeah, thanks," Sasuke added, looking a bit impressed. "Don't mention it. I was trying to find a way to hit the ground running with my training and thought it sounded like something we could all use." She handed Sasuke his set, which took them and regarded them inquisitively. Sakura rubbed the back of her head sheepishly. "I didn't really know where to start, but I was lucky enough to run into this older girl named Tenten, and she showed me these and gave me a lot of advice." "Tenten?" Kakashi spoke up. Sakura nodded. "Yeah, but she said I should run it all by you before I did anything serious, so I don't strain myself." "Good advice." "Miss Tenten's sensei wouldn't happen to be named Guy, would he?" Sakura nodded. "That's him." "How you know this guy?" "Kakashi-sensei." Naruto blinked in surprise. "I do. He's my self-proclaimed eternal rival," the silver-haired man replied, shaking his head. "He routinely challenges me to any sort of contest and won't take no for an answer. When it's my turn to pick, I usually ask for something quick and simple. I've even gotten him to settle for a match of rock, paper, scissors," he mused, causing his students to look at him incredulously. "He's eccentric, but he's easily one of the greatest taijutsu masters around, not just here in Konoha but in the entire shinobi world." "Whoa," Naruto said in awe. "Yeah, that's in line with what Tenten told me," Sakura commented. "She was pretty surprised when I told her you were my sensei, but she didn't say anything about the whole eternal rivals bit. Did she offer any other advice?" Kakashi asked. Sakura seemed to shrink in on herself. "She told me I needed to stop dieting, and it looked like she was taking that to heart too. From how she grimaced." Good. He'd seen how little she ate in wave when she started to worry about her weight and wondered how she got by. Dieting didn't make any sense to him in the first place. As long as you didn't eat like Choji, you'd burn through whatever you ate fast enough as a shinobi anyway. And a few other pointers after I told her how lax you'd been so far. Kakashi suddenly tensed, sucking in a quick breath. You told Guy's student about my teaching?" "Yeah." Kakashi buried his face in his hand. Oh, terrific. If she mentions this to Guy, I'll never hear the end of it. He'll probably run straight to my house with tears in his eyes, screaming about youth dulling or something. He'll probably try to pull me into one of his hugs." Sasuke and Sakura stared at their sensei, exasperated at the Jonin's antics, while Naruto snickered. Sounded like this guy was going to be a handful for his teacher. Served him right for leaving them hanging all the time. Kakashi took A deep breath. Well, nothing to do about it now but hope for the best. Now then, since Sakura was so generous as to get you these gifts, it'd be remiss not to make use of them. Let's take a moment to see what you can handle, then you'll be wearing them for all of our training today. I'll work out how I want you to handle them outside my supervision by tomorrow. Alright, I think that's good for today, Kakashi mused as he looked over his student. Some 5 hours later, he clapped his hands, a signal for the various clones Naruto had training to disperse. The blonde swayed on his feet for a moment. Weariness washed over him as everything the clones had gained poured into his mind along with all their combined exhaustion, but it was nothing he couldn't handle. After swaying on his feet for a moment, he righted himself. He wiped the sweat off the side of his head with his sleeve. As he reviewed what they'd gained, it wasn't much. They'd only sliced about a quarter of the way through the paper, but that was progress. He and his clones were getting the hang of water walking too, slightly faster than Sasuke. Too nice, although the fact that he was more or less getting 5 times the work and plus more as his clones kept it at once they moved on to taijutsu had something to do with it. Of course, Sakura already had it down, and wow, did her gift make things harder, but no pain no gain. He'd gladly wear these weights all day long if it meant he could be the awesome ninja he dreamed of being. Good work today, especially you, Sakura. It's good to see you're turning over a new leaf, Kakashi said, looking down at the pink-haired girl. Once again, Sakura had worn herself ragged and was currently lying on her back staring at the sky. Naruto winced as he looked at her. He hoped she adjusted soon. I'm going to have to if I want to stop being dead weight, Sakura grumbled. Sakura, Naruto started. Naruto, don't. Sakura waved him off as she sat up, wincing slightly. I know what you're going to say, and thank you, but I know I've got a lot of catching up to do to Sasuke and you. She then looked up with determination. But I'll work as hard it takes so that I don't drag you two down next time we're in trouble. Naruto wasn't sure what to say in the end. He just settled for smiling at her determination to get stronger for their sakes. Surprisingly, Sasuke did too. Oh, by the way, Kakashi began, I imagine those training tools cost a small fortune. Sakura cringed, proving him right to have bought 3 sets like that. I'm guessing you've pretty much wiped out all your funds, haven't you? Sakura hung her head, a cloud of woe hovering over her as she began poking the ground and mumbling to herself. Wait, Sakura, you mean you totally broke your bank getting these for us? Naruto asked, his eyes wide. Sasuke raised a brow as he looked at the pink-haired girl. Sakura, you know you could have asked me, right? This wouldn't have made a dent in my funds, I know. Sakura replied listlessly. Whoa, hang on, you didn't have to do that for us. Take them. Oh, they probably won't give you your money back since we've already used them, will they? Then how much was it? I'll pay you for mine, Naruto said. That's alright, she replied. Sasuke frowned. I don't listen, Sakura said, standing back up. This is something I wanted to do. I saw how this could help all of us and decided to go for it so that we could be the best team we could be. Just take it as me doing my part for Team 7. That silenced all future arguments from him and Sasuke from the looks of it. After a moment, Naruto replied, well, guess I'll have to do my part too somehow. I'll think of something. Sasuke gave an affirmative. You know, the timing for this couldn't be better, Kakashi said, drawing their attention. You see, they finally finished processing Zabuza's body today, and so I got my bounty, though the village did keep half of it. Is always good for you, sensei, Naruto grumbled, crossing his arms. Kakashi nodded. Normally a bounty is divided between all involved in actually defeating the ninja in question, so of course it all went to me, Kakashi said, closing his eye. But since I wouldn't have survived my first bout with Zabuza without quick thinking on Naruto and Sasuke's part, and I should have pulled us back from that mission before then. Wait, was he saying? Kakashi I smiled and held up 3 slips of paper. I decided we should split it. Wow, for real? Naruto cried, smiling widely, his fists balled before him in excitement. Well, why? But Sakura stammered. Sakura, Kakashi interrupted. I know what you're going to say, but this is my money, just like the money you spent on the weights was yours. If I feel like sharing it with you, it's my choice. If you feel you haven't earned it, then just keep working like you have been these past few days and prove my faith in you isn't misplaced. Oh, okay, sensei, Sakura replied. Come on, Sakura, be more excited, Naruto said as he reached up to take his check. We're getting. Naruto trailed off into an exclamation of shock. He stared down at the paper grasped in both his hands with his mouth wide open, his eyes wide open, pits of solid white. How? What is? Then Sakura got her check. Her reaction mirrored his as the two stared stupefied at their rewards. Sasuke simply raised a brow and pocketed his own. Naruto came out of his stupor first. Kakashi sensei, thank you so much. He cheered among numerous praises as he threw himself at his sensei and hugged his waist. Hey, get off of me. Kakashi tried to shake him off before finally managing to pry him away, sitting him down with the indifferent Sasuke and slowly recovering. Sakura, now just do me a favor and don't spend it frivolously. Keep most of it for what you need or things you think will help with your training, and please don't gamble with it, or at least do so responsibly. If you can't resist, don't be like Lady Tsunade. Tsunade? Naruto questioned. Really? Sakura questioned incredulously. Naruto, she's one of the Legendary Sannin, 3 of the strongest shinobi our village ever produced. She's the granddaughter of the first Hokage and one of the students of Lord 3rd Hokage. Her teammate trained the 4th. Whoa indeed, and I see we'll have to brush up on your recent history too. Lady Tsunade's every bit the kunoichi. Her reputation paints her as Kakashi acknowledged with a nod. However, she has one problem: she's not so well known around here. For you see, she has a chronic gambling addiction. She simply can't help herself. That wouldn't be so bad, I suppose. There are worse vices, but it's coupled with some of the worst luck known to man. She always loses, but can't stop herself. This unfortunate combination has earned her another nickname throughout the elemental nations. He paused, letting the suspense build. For once, even with the mask, they could tell he was smiling. They thought they might have even seen him shake as he held back a laugh. The legendary sucker Sasuke and Sakura looked very unimpressed with this part of Tsunade's legend, while Naruto cracked up in laughter. Naruto sighed as he pulled out another weed and tossed it into the plastic bag hanging from his shoulder. It had been a few days after Sakura had given their team that gear. Kakashi had been putting them through some pretty tough exercises and taijutsu drills made even harder by the weights. Not that any of them were complaining, they'd all been just a bit unsteady on their feet after all was said and done, and more so after his clones dispersed, but they all felt good about how things were going. After half an hour of rest, they'd been off to do a D-rank mission. Couldn't put those off forever, could they? Honestly, missions like this seem to drag on forever. Pull out one weed. Oh hey, there's a few dozen more. Get them all. Time to get started on the next area. Got that done. Great job. You're about 1/10 of the way there. It didn't help that Kakashi had forbidden them all from using jutsu to speed things up, something about teaching them a lesson in patience. By yeah, I get you, Sakura said, obviously having heard his side. Just grin and bear it like any other D-rank. Just think, some people do this for a living. It's not so bad when you keep that in mind. Maybe, but I get the feeling a professional would never let it get like this in the first place. Naruto grumbled. Keep it down, Naruto, the client might hear you. The pink-haired girl hissed at him. Naruto shrugged. I call it like I see it. Besides, she's inside, and the doors and windows are closed. I can't see how she'd hear me unless I screamed it from the rooftop. You have a point still, Sakura replied with a sigh of her own. She then spied what he was doing. Wait a second, huh? Naruto looked up just as he was about to pluck a small yellow flower from the ground. He didn't know a lot about plants, but he knew enough to know these were weeds, and they spread fast. If you let them, we might need to ask the client about those, Sakura said, cupping her chin. Dandelions are technically weeds, but they have their uses. They attract bees to pollinate flowers, and their roots can draw up nutrients for other plants. She might want those left alone. Naruto blinked, his eyebrows rising. Wow, Sakura, you really know your stuff. Sakura rubbed the back of her head sheepishly and looked away with a slight grimace. Not really, I used to be friends with Ino. Remember, her family runs a flower shop. I just picked up a few things. Oh, Naruto cringed. That was probably a sore subject. I really need to patch things up with her, Sakura admitted, but I've got no idea where to start. Not when I was the one who broke up our friendship. She looked down at that, her face melancholy. Naruto guessed she was probably thinking of past times with Ino, and probably the day they went their separate ways over Sasuke, but this was the first he was hearing that she was the one to end things. Yeah, he got the feeling that fixing that wasn't going to be easy. Well, you won't know until you try, right? That's what Tenten said. Oh, did you meet with her again? Sakura nodded, seeming to brighten up a little. Yeah, she's been giving me some good advice, and it's nice to actually hang out with a girl my age again, or anyone outside class really. Wait, had Ino been her only friend, and she chose to fight with her over Sasuke? Huh, well, he could agree on how great it was to finally have people to spend time with. He knew personally that being alone absolutely sucked. At least she had people she could talk to at the academy. Most of the other kids just put him down, aside from Shikamaru and Choji, and they hadn't exactly talked much. Well, anyway, what's the worst that could happen? She says, screw you, and walks off. At least then you can say you tried. You won't get anywhere if you just think about it all the time, Naruto said before giving her a thumbs up. And worst comes the worst, you still have us. And Tenten, right? Yeah, I guess so. Thanks. Things were going pretty well for his team now. Kakashi couldn't help but think as he neared his home Naruto was handling the shadow clone training method well, as in he wasn't collapsing immediately after every session, though today's conversation told him he'd need to improve the blonde's knowledge of recent history as well as his vocabulary. Actually, better make that history in general. It also might be a good idea to get his students their own copies of the bingo book. It was a little early, sure, but having knowledge of who's who in the shinobi world couldn't hurt. It was good to see Sakura step up on her own. He'd been sure he'd have to take her aside at some point and hammer home how badly she'd needed to improve, but thankfully that had worked itself out. Shame it took was a near-death experience for his whole team, but the emphasis was on near there, and she'd apparently stopped dieting. That was good, though time would tell if she'd slip back into old habits. Hopefully now that Sakura was Actually training in her body was getting the fuel it needs. Her physical energy would improve. She definitely had more than enough mental energy, and with that her stores of chakra would start to see improvement. Nothing too drastic. Sakura would never have Sasuke's reserves, never mind Naruto's, but hopefully he'd soon be able to say they were better than abysmal. As for Naruto, he got the feeling he'd take to Sakura's gift like a duck to water. Good, with his healing power he probably didn't have to worry about the usual drawbacks, not to mention the aches and pains that came with overdoing it. He'd have to take Naruto aside and tell him to push things a little harder, and maybe in a few weeks up the number of shadow clones, and for Sasuke maybe some tutoring on making use of his Sharingan's Genjutsu was in order. They were doing good, but they'd need to be better for the upcoming Chunin exams, and they only had about a month and a half. Finally arriving at his door, he reached for the knob, and suddenly a sound reached his ears, loud pounding footsteps that likely echoed through the whole city block. He turned to the source of the sound to see a massive dust cloud rushing towards him, and at its front was a tall man, well muscled but not overly so. He had a strong jawline, black hair shaped into a bowl cut, and perhaps his most distinguishing feature, sported a massive pair of thick eyebrows. He wore a standard Konoha flak jacket over a green jumpsuit, with orange leg warmers rather than the blue shirt and pants most Konoha shinobi wore. A red forehead protector was tied around his waist like a belt. Kakashi, he bellowed, and as he grew near, the silver-haired man could see that there were streams of tears falling from his eyes like waterfalls. Oh no!